The pelvic girdle is made up of the two hip bones, right? The coxal bones are also called, and then they're going to be fused. They're going to be joined over here to the sacrum. So the hip bone is actually a fusion of three bones. It's a single bone, but it originally was three bones. They're joined together. The two hip bones, the left and right hip bones, are joined together in that pubic symphysis right here, that fibrocartilage articulation right here. All right, so for these hip bones, these are kind of complicated too. You're going to want to look at them from both sides. Right here, this is the looking from the lateral side. You could tell because this right here is where the femur sits into the hip bone. All right, so this is that joint cavity right here. So you're looking at the outside right here. So when we go over, when I said that it was made up of three bones, you could think of these as three regions right here. In red, right here, this top portion, the entire top portion is called the ilium, and it's the iliac region. The bottom portion is split into an anterior and posterior region, and this anterior portion region is called the pubic region right here, and the posterior region is called the ischial region or the ischium. So here's it from all different sides right here. Here's the ilium in green right here. The ischium. So this is the posterior side right here, over here, and the pubic region right over here. Not that I'll ask you, what is this bone? But I might ask you, what is this feature right here? Or what is this feature? And what is this feature? Or what is this feature right here, right? So a lot of the features you're going to see are going to have names like the iliac crest, right? The anterior superior iliac spine, the anterior inferior iliac spine. Here's the iliac fossa right here. And then you have the posterior superior and inferior iliac spine right here. Notice they're all on the ilium right there. So you're going to look for those kind of names. Over here, you have a ischial spine. You have a pubic angle or pubic ramus right here. This is why it's important to kind of learn the regions of the name, so that at the very least, if you say ischial spine, you'll know it's somewhere down on the posterior inferior region of that hip bone. Ischial tuberosity, there's another one. So that's your hip bone, and your hip bone's connected to your thigh bone, right? So you're down here, just like you had on the upper limb, you had a humerus, and then you had the radial and your ulnar. Here you're going to have the femur and the tibia and fibula over here, right? So here's your femur. Again, we have a head, that ball, just like your humerus, that's going to fit into this right here, which is called the acetabulum. Right? So this head is going to fit right there. You have this neck, which is an obvious neck right here of the femur. So your head and your neck have these instead of, remember, we had the greater and lesser tubercle of the humerus. Here we have a greater and lesser trochanter, right, which is an even larger projection than a tubercle. So they named it something different. One of the differences between those two, of the tubercles and the trochanters, is that these trochanters are obvious on the posterior side. So you're looking at the posterior side over here, versus on the humerus, those tubercles are on the anterior side, your greater and lesser tubercle. But your greater tubercle is a little bit more superior than your lesser tubercle, and that same relationship is going to hold true for these trochanters right there, right? Your greater trochanter is very obviously superior than your lesser trochanter. It's not so much the size as the position right there. So those are your trochanters. The other thing of note up here proximally is your gluteal tuberosity, which leads into your linea aspera, right? These are major muscle attachment points as well. So your linea aspera, for sure, that's something that's an important point. All right, so that's the proximal. And then you go down to the distal portion. What you'll want to know over here, the epicondyles are not super distinct here, but you do have a medial epicondyles. What you want to know right here are the condyles right here. right? These patella surfaces, because these, you have a medial condyle and a lateral condyle, right? Which are going to join up with the lateral, medial and lateral condyle of the tibia over here. And so you'll notice the femur is sitting right here on the tip of the tibia right here. The fibula itself is not directly connected to the femur, right? It's sitting a little bit below, nestled underneath the lateral condyle of the tibia. All right, so for the tibia, or for these bones up here proximally, you have again, the medial and the lateral condyle. The lateral bone is the fibula, the medial bone is the tibia, by the way. All right, so that's how you remember that. And you'll also have the tibial tuberosity, this major sort of bump on the front of the knee right here. This is where your patella ligament is going to be attached to. All right, and just like your radial and your ulnar, you have this interosseous membrane connecting the two. So for these bones, again, those structures that I just said about the tibia, the only thing about the fibula is to differentiate between the fibula head and what's called the lateral malleolus. Right? So you have a lateral malleolus on the fibula, and on the other end of your tibia, you have a medial malleolus. And these make up, just like those styloid processes of your proximal, radial, and ulnar bones, make up that sort of bracket of your wrist joint. These are going to make up the bracket of your ankle joint. So your medial malleolus will remind you where the medial condyle is, right over here. And this is your inner ankle, basically. This is this right over here. So those are the things you're going to want to know about the tibia and fibula. All right. So they are going to go down and connect with the bones of the foot to form that ankle joint. And just like you had the carpals of your hand, you have the tarsals of your foot. Right? And those are those, instead of 8, you got 7 of these bones right here. And those tarsal bones are connected to the metatarsal bones, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Your big toe is your number 1 right here, and notice that that is sitting medially. If you wiggle your big toe right now, you can confirm that, right? So unlike your remember your thumb, which is your digit 1, is because you're in anatomical position, that's facing laterally. Just a mental note there, all right? But these are your metatarsals. They're going to be attached distally to your phalanges, just like, and the naming and everything is exactly like your hand, right? So you got the 2 on your big toe right here, your distal and proximal, and then all these have your distal, middle, and proximal, distal, middle, and distal phalanges of your foot. All right, so here is your middle phalange of digit 3 of your foot. All right, so the radius and ulnar distally are going to join up with the carpal bones to have the wrist joint, and the tibia and fibula are going to connect with the tarsal bones to form the ankle joint. And so again, the logic of the naming is all similar and easy to remember. You just have to remember the word phalanges, and that this is proximal, middle, and distal, right? So these are exactly the same. And for those carpals, again, the metacarpal, of the hand, they're going to be starting with number 1 is going to be your thumb, and then move medially, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So here's metacarpal 1, metacarpal 2, etc., right? And then for your metatarsals, your metatarsal 1 is medially. And then you get to your carpals bones and your tarsal bones. For these, you're going to have the little mnemonic to learn these individual bones right here. The first thing you're going to want to do for your hand bones is learn where to start, right? So the most proximal and lateral bone, so remember your radius and your thumb is sitting laterally, and so your radius is connecting to this large bone right here, right? So this is the first bone when we learn this mnemonic right here, right? SLTPTTCH. So let's see if I can remember them. Scaphoid, lunate, triquetium, pisiform, starting with a P. And then you're going to go back over here, back to the lateral side, the distal lateral side, to go the trapezium, trapezoid, capitulum, and the hamate bone right here. Okay, and so how I remember this year after year is through this mnemonic: some lovers try positions that they can't handle, right? And that'll give you a little key, a little reminder on how to remember them. Really, the bones that I care about are your scaphoid, your lunate, and really your scaphoid and your trapezium right here. Right? These are ones that might be more involved in like injuries. These are the forming the connection. The scaphoid and lunate are the actual joint surfaces connected to the radius, and the trapezium, which rhymes with thumb, by the way, so remember it from trapezoid, is another important one, right? But that's how you'd remember these names. I put scandalous lovers because it sounds a little more like scaphoid, right? Triquetium, tri, and then these names right here, right? So that's the stupid way. I remember it every year, year after year. I wouldn't remember it otherwise, right? These are the kind of tricks you got to use. And then the other thing to remember is that you got to start at the most proximal lateral position, which is the scaphoid. So I say, please learn proximal lateral. And then from pisiform right here, you're going to go back to your trapezium, right? And you're going to remember trapezium because it reminds with thumb. And I'll remind you to go back there and then go back toward the hamate, move laterally, medially, sorry. All right, so proximal to medial, and then go back to this lateral part and move medially again. For your foot bones, this is a little more difficult because they're not quite in order. First thing you're going to want to look at is the major two big bones that you could see right here. The biggest bone that's connected, sitting neatly inside that little cup-shaped thing, is your talus bone right here, right? So here's your talus. That's the joint surface of your talus. And then making up your heel mostly is the calcaneus bone, right? Your calcaneus bone. That is where your calcaneum tendon, otherwise known as your Achilles, right? The Achilles tendon, right? So this is your Achilles heel right there. So strictly your ankle joint is your tibia talar joint, or at least that part of it. So for your tibia and your talus. So your talus and your calcaneus are these very prominent big bones right here, right? So here's the talus. Let's see the joint surface right there, your calcaneus. So the stupid thing to remember here is tiger, cubs, need, and that goes to this other most proximal bone, your navicular. And then these more distal ones, which are attached to your metatarsals, three of them are going to be named cuneiform bones. So you can have a medial, intermediate, and lateral cuneiform. One medial, intermediate, and cuneiform. And then the last bone right here is called your cuboidal. All right. So those four are attached to your metatarpals. And then you got these three right here, your calcaneum, which you could think of your calcaneum tendon, and then your talus, which is one of your major ankle joint bones. All right, so those are the bones of your upper and lower limbs. The most straightforward strategy for learning these is once you've learned the bone names, you're going to want to learn the most pronounced or distinct features, their names, and general location on the bone, the proximal, the distal end, whether they're on the anterior or posterior surface, the medial or lateral side, and then go on to relate the more subtle features to these major features once you have that down. All right, see you next time.